Naturally, people are pretty loud about their political ideologies, but there are some that don't even know what these political ideologies mean. Over the summer, I am going to do a series where I cover different political ideologies, break them down, explain what they mean, where they come from, and why I don't think you should support them. We're starting off with communism because it's one of the most famous, most misunderstood, and dangerously romanticized political ideologies that exist. This is going to be a two-parter because there are two types of communism. There's type 1, and there's type 2. Type 1 is like true, idealist, pure communism. It's stuff written in the Communist Manifesto. Like idealist theory of communism. True communism. So that's type 1. And then type 2 is our modern conception of communism, which is the nations that have tried to apply it. The Soviet Union, the communist China, Cuba, nations like that, where it's actually applied, and it's not communism. It's actually authoritarian socialism. We're going to be covering type 1 today, and now we can begin. The communist dream and why it never works. Okay, so let me paint a picture. It's the industrial age in Europe. Rich get richer, poor get poorer, horrible conditions for workers. You know, it's the industrial age. There are two guys. One is Karl Marx, and the other is Friedrich Engels. So they're hearing about this new ideology, communism and socialism, and they're kind of like intermixed during this time. And so they try to write about they try to create a concrete idea of what it means, and they write about it with the name of communism. And they write the Communist Manifesto. Okay, what you need to understand is a couple of the things that they write about in the Communist Manifesto. The first thing they talk about, or one of the main things they talk about, is historical materialism. The idea that all society is based around producing materials. And they write about how there are two sections, basically. The rich, and then there's the poor, or the working class. The WC, the working class. And all society is based around producing, materials. Items, food, whatever. Let's say in farming. So the rich, let's say that they own a bunch of land, and they get the working class to grow on this land. And so they share some of these materials and share some of this money. The rich's primary concern is trying to get all of this material and all of this money to them. And the poor's primary concern is trying to get all these materials and all of this money to them. And society is based around this constant struggle. The thing is, in order for the rich to get richer, and in order to get the most amount of money and the most amount of materials, is by creating monopolies. And these monopolies make it impossible to choose other options in society. And so they have to buy the rich's monopolies on, let's say, wheat, so that they don't have any other options but to buy the rich's wheat. And then this creates a constant cycle of exploitation of the working class. Basically, both people try to get as much materials and money for themselves, and it creates a constant struggle for the working class. And they want to treat this. This is a primary concern of capitalism. Communism is when all of the workers share the same amount of product and money. So there's no private businesses. There's no class distinctions. There's no competition. They all work in these like massive industrial factories or these farms, and they produce materials, and they all get shared equally to different people. It's all shared equally. They all get the same response. And it sounds pretty good in theory, right? Sounds like a pretty good solution to this problem. Sounds like communism's a pretty good idea when you read it like that, baseline. I have 6 points. Point 1. Communism demands total control. To have equality in production, you have to take away choice, property, and personal freedoms, which are all human rights. Problem number 2. Regulation. How do you enforce communism? Dictators and a controlling state. So if you speak out against communism, or you create a private business, or hoard money to yourself, you're thrown in prison, tortured, and killed, which I don't think is a good solution. Number 3. People are naturally greedy. Without personal incentive or personal profit, they will either stop working or seize control, like in the Soviet Union. Number 4. No competition equals no progress. If you don't try to be better than the other guy, then there's no progression. Of course, there's monopolies and there's stuff like that, but naturally, competition between businesses creates progress. In between nations, too. So, like, innovation in medicine, technology, agriculture, and industry, those all come from either competing businesses or nations competing with nations. For an example, let's say there's these 2 brands of chairs. When they're competing to try to sell more chairs, naturally they'll create better and better chairs. And then by that, people will get better chairs to sit on, right? Number 5. A fundamental flaw in communist logic is that without private businesses, somebody else to be in charge. So, these large factories or large properties of farming need to be controlled by someone. Without somebody controlling these, it doesn't work. Their solution is the state and dictators. And then there's number 6. The cycle of collapse. Naturally, when there's communism, we can look at Soviet Union. So when there's equal share and equal pay, naturally people will try to stop that, or they'll try to disrupt the equal pay. Or in like different scenarios, the state that's trying to regulate equality between the shares of materials assumes power. They start creating like power struggles, and then there starts to be elites and the rich again. And then it creates the same problem that it solves. A small group of people hoarding power while regular people suffer. It's the same problem communism has with capitalism. It just creates it in a new way, and often with a bunch of side effects of communism. Communism has never been tried. For a reason. If you ever ask a modern communist, but one that like knows what communism is, they'll say the same thing. Communism has never been tried. And I think that there's a reason for that. They ultimately say that like the Communist Manifesto, like true pure communism, has never been tried in society. Communist China, the Soviet Union, Cuba, North Korea, those are all not true pure communism, which is correct, but why then? Why has it never been tried? Because it's probably capitalism and communism, the most popular forms of economy. So why? And it's existed since the industrial age, but with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. So why has it never been tried? Well, what I'm thinking is that for communism to work, well, you need everyone in society to agree to share power, labor, and goods equally, seemingly forever, which is not how humans work. There's no ambition, there's no greed, no selfishness, no competition, and no corruption. Not how humans work. The last part of this video cut out, so we're just gonna re-record from where we began. So, in order to have communism, you need to have no ambition, no greed, which is not how humans work. Communism eventually needs a government, which eventually takes control of everything, which creates a situation where you can't vote your way out, you can't build something better, and you can't even speak out. So you get a dictatorship that calls itself communist, but it never matches the actual theory. Real communism has never been tried because real communism can't be tried. Whenever somebody does try, it leads to control, collapse, and then bloodshed. Not because they didn't do it right, but because the idea itself is broken. If the only way your system works is if it's never been tried and only lives inside of a manifesto, that means it doesn't work. Communism. It's a reactive form derived from capitalism. For this reason, it's less flexible and has lower survival potential. Communism doesn't have the capacity to change. William S. Burroughs. Look, I understand why people fall for communist ideology. Sounds like a good system, and it solves a lot of the problems with capitalism when you hear about it. But replacing a system that can be good with proper regulation with a system that always leads to death camps and starvation is not what we need. There are real problems. Marx, Engels, and other communists want to solve them. Exploitation, inequality, and greed. But their solution is a fantasy. One that ignores human nature, assumes perfect cooperation, and requires the kind of control that always turns ugly. That's not almost communism. That is what communism is. When this theory hits reality. The twist is that in our next episode, we're not talking about regular communists that just want a better system and think this is the way to do it. In our next episode, we're talking about the people who want dictatorships, who want authoritarian socialism, who want these dangerous systems back. The young people, and old, and all, who are so radical that they romanticize Mao, Stalin, Che Guevara, the modern conception of communism. Let's talk about it in part 2.